everybody, you're listening to the Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review, and we play local, unsigned and or independent music. So this week we're going to be talking to true crime buff and podcaster David McClam. But before we do that, a little bit of admin. You can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. You can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, anybody with stories to share, MP3s, local arts news, all of that good stuff. Don't hesitate to get in touch. We're repeating on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're also on the Wickham Sound Listen again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcast. So we're going to head straight on over to the Rhylight Zone for the latest instalment of Formerly, The Rise and Fall of a Social Network. This is a novel by myself, Dane Cobain. We have been serialising it in recent weeks. If you've missed an episode, you can obviously catch up on the players. You can also get Formerly as a paperback, audiobook, and ebook on Amazon and all good bookstores. So the latest instalment of Formerly.
Chapter 17. We settled into American life pretty quickly, although my dire predictions came true. We had almost no time to ourselves, and we got used to treating the office like a giant common room. It didn't matter what the time was, you could always guarantee that at least 2 people were working and at least 2 more were kicking back and relaxing. With Formerly, it was often difficult to tell the difference between the two. Flick was the only one of us who stuck to her contractual hours, mainly because she had to. Our users were online around the clock and so were our developers, but Flick only had to worry about the press. One Tuesday afternoon, a couple of weeks after we moved into the complex, Peter rolled into the office on his Segway and called an emergency meeting at the bar, which had become our go-to place for everything from weekly kickoffs to brainstorms and corporate announcements. One thing was for sure, something interesting always happened when we gathered there, even if it was just Kerry lining up a row of shots and then spewing them back up onto his shoes. On this day, though, Peter had something on his mind. "Well, folks," he said, "thanks for giving me some time. I know we're pretty short on that at the moment, so I'll keep this brief. Formerly has been nominated for an award. We're up for the best new startup at TechCrunch Disrupt, and John and I have been nominated for Founders of the Year. How about that?" "That's awesome," said Flick, leaning in for a high five. "I'll get on it straight away. At last, something to shout about." "No, you won't," Peter replied. "At least, not yet. First, we need to win the damn thing." "But what if we don't win it?" "Of course we'll win it. We're Formerly. In fact, that's something else we need to talk about. We need to sort out numbers for the ceremony. I want us to have a decent presence there when we win it. John's going to work on our acceptance speech, and I'll be sorting out travel and accommodation. We don't need the whole team to go, just the best of the best." "Oh yeah?" I laughed. "And who are our best?" "Well, you're one of them," Peter said. "And we'll take Flick and Kerry along too. John, Niels and I will be going, but we'll need a couple more to fill the table. That's where the fun comes in. John, want to tell them your idea?" "Sure thing," he said. "Peter and I have figured out a fair way to decide who gets the seats. We're going to have a pitch day on Monday. If you want to join us in New York, you need to tell us why you deserve to go. Peter and I will listen to the pitches and allocate the remaining seats from there. Any questions? No? Good. Then get back to work." On the day of the pitches, we ordered in some pizza and cracked open a couple of beers. It was a long and boring day. Some of our newbies were fired up with excitement, but I had the cynicism of an old-timer. The whole thing was just a charade, a popularity contest that I wanted no part in. Luckily, I blagged my way out of it by faking a setback in the new internal ranking system. The plan was to show users how active they'd been and how many words they'd posted on the site. It could either encourage them or deter them, and we had no way of knowing without testing it. We were meant to be rolling it out to just 1% of users, but my fictional bug threatened to push the update live for everyone. It was enough to get me out of the pitches, and I later learned I'd picked a good time to skive. Flick said they were terrible, an utter waste of time and resources, but whatever. By the end of it, John had picked the final employees to accompany us to New York. We only had a dozen days to go until the ceremony, and the founders were already stressed out about it, and they weren't the only ones under a lot of pressure. My body was worn out, and I started feeling ill. It wasn't like a normal sickness, though. Sure, I threw up all the time, hardly slept and couldn't swallow solid food, but it was more than that. It was in my head and beneath my skin, and despite the doctor's reassurances that it was stress-related and that I should try to rest and recuperate, I still worried I had cancer or some sort of internal hemorrhaging. The anxiety was the worst part, but I couldn't afford to let it affect my work. There was too much to do, and I was often the only one who actually knew how to do things. By the time that we flew to Disrupt, my body had given up and so had I. It felt like my purpose in life was to work until I dropped, like even prison or death would be better than being in purgatory. Even the medication did little to help. A cocktail of hyoscine butyl bromide and citalopram to calm my stomach and to stabilise my moods. The stress of work, combined with the long hours, gave me palpitations and a deep, dark fear of the future. "Don't go to New York," Flick had said, cupping a cold hand around the back of my neck. "I'm serious, Dan. You're exhausted and you need a rest. Tell John you can't go." "Hell no," I replied. "He'll kill me." "Yeah? Well, if you go, you'll kill yourself, and then what am I going to do?" Flick had got a point, but it felt like I had no choice. I felt a lot better after we landed, although I had a moment as I passed through security and started struggling to breathe. The flight attendants almost refused to let me board until John leapt to my defence. Once we were safely on board, he leaned in and whispered, "What the hell do you think you're doing, Dan? Are you trying to f*** this up for us?" I had no reply, but luckily he let it lie. He was in good spirits again by the time that we landed, a state of cheerful optimism which he maintained until the following evening, the evening of the ceremony. It was an unusual night, and one of the only times I ever saw the founders wearing suits. We'd all scrubbed up for the occasion. The guys were wearing tuxedos and shiny black shoes, and Flick, as the only woman, stood out like a thing of beauty in the middle of a war zone, a stunning creature in a soft blue dress. I was feeling a little better, well enough to eat and drink, and the ceremony started without incident. The food was fantastic, little canapes passed around on silver platters, and rich ingredients I'd never even heard of. The champagne was flowing and I was in a jolly mood before I knew it, a mood which turned sour when the night took an unpleasant turn. The shit went down when Formally was up for its first award, Best New Startup, which John and Peter thought was already in the bag. It turned out that they were wrong. When the host called out another name, John's face turned scarlet. He just couldn't stand another company picking up the trophy and being the centre of attention, but he shouldn't have worried. Formally was about to get some attention of its own. The two founders shot to their feet in disbelief, and the cameras that were panning the crowd honed in on them. It started off as a shouting match with John and Peter screaming into each other's faces, but it soon turned into a brawl. I held back, but my stomach lurched as Flick rushed forward to fill the gap between Niels, who was pulling his fist back, and the face of a scraggy-haired tech geek who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's where things started to get hazy. I stood up and went after Flick. A couple of seconds later, I took a knee to the head and a fist to the chin and crumbled to the floor. When I came round in the back of the ambulance, I saw John sitting there beside me, one hand clutching a cold compress to a swollen eyelid while the other eye glared back at me. I could tell that he wasn't happy. They took us to the hospital to check us over. John was released, but they kept me in for observation. My blood pressure was above normal and I had a mild concussion, but really they were more concerned about the palpitations that I kept having. As I lay in the hospital bed that evening, tossing and turning whilst I tried to get to sleep, I flickered arbitrarily through TV channels in search of something to fall asleep to, a talk show to keep me company or a rerun of Top Gear to take the edge off things. When I reached the news, my blood ran cold and I sat bolt upright in bed. A familiar face was looking back at me through the screen. Peter was being interviewed by a reporter, and he'd spruced himself up with wax in his hair and an expensive suit that he'd bought back before Formally moved stateside. "We have a unique opportunity," he was saying. "Most social networking sites are constrained by the number of people who are currently alive. We, on the other hand, will only grow and grow as time and generations go by." "But how does that help your company?" "Let's put it this way," Peter replied. "According to a guy called Carl Horb, who's a demographer, over 100 billion people have died since 50,000 BC. That might sound like a lot, but as the population increases, so does the number of people who die. All of our competitors are limited to the current population of the Earth. We can tap into that and augment it with the legions of the dead. That means that our potential user base is as close to infinite as you can get." "But how can someone be a user if they're dead?" Peter laughed at the question and dragged a hand through his roguish hair. "Other social networks are limited by the number of people on the planet," he said. "You can't be an active user if you're dead. We're different. Formally defines an active user as anyone whose profile is accessed, either from the back end of the site if they're alive or from their memorial page if they're dead. Our user base is growing exponentially. If you take the current mortality rate and factor in our growth rate and the rising population of the planet, we expect to hit 15 billion before 2100 and 50 billion before 2200, maybe sooner." "Big plans indeed," the anchor said, "but perhaps a little far-fetched. Social networking is still in its relative infancy after all." The cameras drifted and the shot shifted to an aerial view of the company's headquarters. Peter clearly had more to say, but the reporter refused to give his crazy claims the airtime that they probably deserved. As for me, I didn't care. I was just glad to be away from the office. I booted up my laptop, loaded a web browser, pointed it at former.ly and logged into my profile for the first time in months. The hospital released me the following day with a possible diagnosis: anxiety disorder brought on by the stress of working at Formerly. They suggested arranging a consultation with a local doctor and suggested some therapy techniques in the meantime. Then they checked me out and unleashed me on the world again. I caught a flight back to California a couple of days later. John and Peter didn't seem pleased to see me when I pulled up outside the complex, but then I was happy with anything short of open hostility. In their eyes and in the eyes of the rest of the team, I deserted the company in its hour of need. Sorry just wasn't going to cut it, but that didn't stop me from saying it. Save your apologies, John replied. You might need 'em later. Right now, we need you at your desk. Why? I asked. What's new? We're working on a new feature, and we're going to need your help on it. It's a biggie, and according to our prelim tests, it will help to increase revenue and engagement simultaneously. We did some work on it while you were away, but we need a little magic to speed it up ahead of the beta launch. What kind of feature are we talking about? I asked. It's pretty simple, really, John replied. We want to add a ticker on the back end of the site so that when you're viewing your dashboard, you can see who died and when, with a particular focus on friends and family. Why? I asked again. What's the point? The point? John laughed. If we remind people that their friends are dead, they're more likely to stay on the site for long enough to post a message of remembrance. Time is money and money is money, and the more we can milk from our users, the better. When he put it like that, he had a point. In fact, it was so simple that I was surprised we hadn't thought of it before. John quickly gave me some instructions. When I was happy with what he wanted me to do, I wandered over to my desk, booted up my computer and got to work.
That was the latest instalment of Formerly, The Rise and Fall of a Social Network by myself, Dane Cobain, for this week's entry to the Rhylight Zone. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is So Long Space Girl with Peaches and Cream.
To blame, I wish that I could tell you, waiting for the day that I can make it clear. I'm waiting for the shock wave of my heart. You can also tear my world and skies apart. Explosion of emotions. Your contamination will forever last. Your radioactive smog will always cloud over my path. Of delivery comes in different forms. I try to duck and cover as you swing your chemical claws. Increase the size of your arsenal and expand your yield. Expand your yield. I'll fade one that people share. Surely sealed. Surely sealed.
That was Nuclear Love by Humans Can't Reboot, and before that we had Peaches and Cream by So Long Space Girl. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is podcaster and true crime buff, David McClam. So my first question is one I ask everybody, and it's what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it?
The last book that I read was Tomorrow's Dead by David Dane. I was preparing for an interview with him. It's an excellent book. I liked it. I really enjoyed it. He's an ex-chief of police. And so even though his stories are fictional, they are wrapped around in police personnel.
Yeah.
So it was really intriguing to read that one. I liked it.
Cool. And have you had your interview with him yet?
I just did yesterday. Yeah. So that should be coming out soon.
Awesome. Cool. So one for people to look out for. And that brings me nicely onto kind of what I want to talk to you about. So what can you tell us about your podcast?
So True Crime and Authors was dropped September 5th of 2022 is a concept I came up with because I do another show with my daughter called A Day with Crime. But that's a kind of a tag team. So it's the both of us. When it comes to cases, we have to actually agree on the cases to do.
Yeah.
And there's so many cases out there that I wanted to put that out there in the world. But on the other hand of that, I wanted to be able to combine that with something else I'm passionate about, which was reading. And so being on Bookstagram and being in several different book clubs that I'm in, there's a lot of authors like yourself that's out there that a lot of people have never heard of. And so I said, what if I can introduce them to the world and get people interested in their books? And that's where True Crime and Authors was born. Awesome. Definitely the most popular part of my show is the author interviews, which I'm happy for. And that's what I'm looking for. So that's how True Crime and Authors came to be. And it's been going awesome.
Cool. And what is it about crime and true crime that interests you?
Even though it can be a gory subject, true crime is a part of our life all over the world.
Yeah.
And there's somebody left me a comment that said true crime never ends in a happy ending. There is some that does.
Yeah.
But because it does affect our life, there are some cases that should never be forgotten, some that should be relived. I know everybody's going crazy right now because Jeffrey Dahmer's back in the news. That's a very important case, not only because of the crimes he committed, but there's a lot of racial issues and why people wasn't believed and things of that nature. And just so that we are able to avoid those pitfalls maybe as we go on in life. And that's why I do it.
Yeah. Well, there's that saying, isn't there, that if you don't remember history, then it repeats itself. And also, I suppose, I mean, by raising awareness of some of these cases, I mean, I suppose like a dream outcome for you would be for you to cover a case and then for, you know, a new witness to come forward or something like that.
Absolutely. And that actually did happen in the last case, which was about Adnan Syed, who was a young Muslim man who spent 20 years plus in jail because they said he killed his girlfriend. And now a lot of different evidence has come out and they've had to release him. So yeah, it's really good when you cover a case and then it does take that twist.
Yeah. And that comes back to there as well, those kind of racial issues. And also like something I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and I'm sure you've come across it, the Innocence Project, which is like a non-profit there that aims to fight the corner for people who've been wrongly convicted. And you do hear about that, people who've served sort of 20 plus years in jail under false evidence or police cover-ups or whatever it is.
Right. And I like the Innocence Project. I've covered some cases where theirs on there. There's a lot of people they've discovered that's not guilty. We won't get into this today, but that's one reason why I'm opposed to the death penalty is because there's so many cases I've covered and the Innocence Project has delved into of someone they were going to execute and found out that the guy or the girl never did the crime.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect system, but they're making a huge, huge impact in the world. And there's a lot of people free that should be because of that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I used to do. Have you come across Hunter Killer?
Yes, the game. Yes, my family used to play that. Yeah.
yeah. I did the first season of it. I've actually got that over there on the wall is the map of Mallory Rock from that season there. But what I thought was interesting about that, so for people who aren't aware of this, it's like a subscription-based board game kind of thing. You get clues and you kind of you discover the case and you kind of try and solve the case yourself. But they donate part of their sales from their subscription boxes to the Innocence Project as well, which I think is a really cool kind of initiative on their part.
Oh, I never knew that. Yeah, my family, we got really into it. We went and bought what we call the murder board. We had everything paid. You thought we was real detectives up in here. But no, I'm glad to hear that.
Awesome, cool. So what are some of the most who are some of the most interesting people you've chatted to? I guess both for the your podcast you do solo, but for the one you do with your daughter as well.
So it's probably some of the most intriguing cases. Well, from A Day with Crime. Well, I just chatted with you, which is coming out pretty soon. We talked about your book, Meat. I found that to be very interesting. Just your takes on, why you wrote the book, and we talked a little bit about vegetarianism. So you were definitely one of my favorite ones. Kirsten Modulin, if you guys never heard of her, she's the #1 best-selling Amazon author in the U.S. This woman releases books like nobody else, and I found her really intriguing. I think now she's up to her 8th or 9th book in this year.
Wow, yeah.
It's like every month we turn around, she's dropping a book. So to chat with her and to figure out how she's able to do that and actually do what a lot of authors want to do is rely on their writing. She retired her husband in the middle of the pandemic, and that's all she does. So that was definitely intriguing. With my daughter, we've done so many cases. There's over 158 cases over there. I think Westminster 3, which I'm going to be releasing on A Day with Crime, I'm just going to repurpose that because some cases, when you do them, you can't get the same feeling back that you had when you originally did the first time. But we did the case of the West Memphis 3, which is one of the most intriguing ones over there. Kind of reminds me a lot of the Adnan Syed case. 3 young men that was accused of killing 3 young boys, which finally they didn't do it, but the government kind of screwed them a little bit because they made them take an Alfred plea. They found other evidence, but when you got one person on death row, the government has the pull, and they're like, if you don't take this plea, we just, Damien could die. So they did that. Definitely one of the most intriguing ones, how that outcome. They're all free now, but that just kind of shows you the gamut of cases that I've kind of covered.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And what software and hardware do you use to record your shows?
So right now I'm using the Rodecaster Pro 2. I did start out with the Rodecaster Pro. It is definitely a podcaster's dream in a box. About everything you want, it has. And I do use Mac. So I use my Mac Mini M1 and then Logic Pro usually to edit that along with the script is how I get my transcripts out for the show.
Cool. And what makes somebody a good guest in your eyes? What do you look out for?
Just somebody that's honest, unique, that really wants to do their craft and help others to do that. My other goal is to kind of unite authors that's never heard of each other before. So that's it. You just want to come on, share your platform. You're passionate about it, and you want people to follow you.
Cool, awesome. And one of the questions I wondered. So again, you mentioned you're a big reader, and I suppose you do some of this to prepare for your shows. But do you write it all yourself?
I do not write at all. I'm considering it though. I do have an uncle, Eugene Napoleon, who's featured on my show. He is an author.
Yeah.
So I have been told I should write a book about my life. I have been considering that. And now that I know I have him and I know who Genius Books is now, I'm actually considering trying to sit down and pen something out in the next year or two.
Awesome, cool. And I guess you've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but if any more come to mind, I wondered what are some of the true crime cases that have really stuck with you and you haven't been able to get out of your head?
Some that I probably haven't done yet. Well, I just ran across one about she was a bodybuilder who killed her husband.
Yeah, I saw that in the news.
Did you see that one?
Yeah.
So I knew of him. I never knew what happened to him till I watched that. That case kind of upset me and it stuck with me in my head because it deals a lot with domestic violence.
Yeah.
And I am a product of that. My father was very, very violent, and the same thing she went through. She spent 25 years of her life in jail for something I don't believe that she did maliciously. But when you get into those situations, if you watch the documentary, you'll automatically hear the DAs discrediting her because of her size. And there's a stigma about women who look bigger than men, but we are still more powerful than they are. And even though her husband was a bodybuilder, and so was she, he was 4 times bigger than she was. So that one sticks in my head. And of course, the George Floyd case that we covered, that definitely sticks in my head. It does for a number of reasons. Yes, there's a typical reasons because an African-American case, not only that was a case that affected the world. And I think for the first time, the world was able to see, even though it's tragic, what does happen behind racial lines and things of anyone in color, or even sometimes white people in the right situations. This is what happens. And the difference between that case, they want to compare that with Emmett Till. And I always get the question, what is the difference between Emmett Till and George Floyd? And my answer is, for once, the world had to watch it. Emmett Till was killed in the middle, in the backwoods somewhere, and he was hung in a cotton gin, where this guy was murdered. Everybody was taking, screenshots and cameras, and you had to watch it. And so I hope that case and a lot of other cases helps us change the world as people.
You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with podcaster and true crime buff David McClam. And this is Alice Jane with Pulling Thread.
The pull of a sunset after the tears of a rainy day. All the melodies of laughter in your living room. It strings together all of the moments that call you broken. And there is a peace that connects with every piece. You're still pulling all the threads together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours. Already grown, the sunflower turns to the sun. are weaving, our hearts beating, tying them next to yours.
That was Pulling Threads by Alice Jane. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head back to chat to David McClam, who is a podcaster and true crime fanatic.
Yeah, and I think again as well, I guess like talking about those two cases, it's very easy for people to say, well, Emmett Till was, 70, 80 years ago or whatever it was. Whereas George Floyd, is in our lifetimes, like it's happening now. And also the worst thing is that even since George Floyd, there have been kind of repetitions of the same thing happening. Not even just in America as well. I mean, you could look at, what's happening in Iran at the moment with, student protesters being killed by heavy-handed police and stuff as well. And so I think it raises that interesting question as well of like, there's that Latin saying, which is, I think it's like qui custodia or whatever, which means who will watch the watchers. And I think that's, a very 21st century thing that we, the people, we need to be the people who hold the police to account. At the end of the day, they're supposed to protect and serve us rather than to be a private militia or whatever,
Right. And when you get into that, like you said, I agree. It's definitely the people that's going to stop it. But then when you have sometimes in the upper echelons, you got people up there that's also corrupt. It just runs a gamut. And so I held a conference with somebody before, and I said, it's not really a color thing anymore. It's a people thing. It's those of us of every race that's tired of these things happening just as human beings. And we want to put fire to that, and we want that to end. It's the only way it's going to stop.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so this is a bit of a subject change now, but when we chatted, you mentioned your indoor garden, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So even though I never can remember the name of that device, there is if you look them up, there's tons of them now. I wanted to start growing my own basil about 3 years ago because my wife cooks all this soup. And then they came across this little pot that you can do it in your home. And I'm like, yeah, this is not going to ever work. And they advertise, they say, hey, we can do this 4 times faster than doing this in gardening soil. So sure enough, we buy one, and it's just a seed packet. It's like a seed pod you put in there, and it comes with a light, and it has a light cycle. And so like for the first few days, you're like, man, it is bright in here because it lights up the whole room. But then you start seeing sprouts in like 3 days. So true to form, in about a month, I had a nice bushel of basil. And so there's many other things you can grow in there. I've grown basil, I've grown jalapenos, we've grown peppers. Only thing you really can't do in there is if you're trying to do radishes, as I found it the hard way, because they grow from the bottom. Right. So they lock into the holes that's there, and you have to cut them off to get them there. But yeah, anybody's looking into gardening, if you just type online indoor gardening, they all pop up. Now there's several different companies that does it.
Awesome. Cool. And so back to podcasting, as well as creating them, are there any podcasts that you sort of regularly consume?
Let's see. What Was That Like is one that I consume all the time. It is a podcast that deals with people who's went through extraordinary things that maybe no one else has. So like, for instance, they had a woman named Diana who survived a plane crash that she never should have survived. They missed the runway and end up in the middle of going across a 2-lane highway. He's covered people that's been in buildings that collapsed that they made it out. So that's always a good one to listen to. I listen to that when I consume that on the road. I'll be listening to Scam Goddess. That is a podcast where the host actually breaks down all of the scams that has been done by women. 2020 released a documentary not long ago on scammers, so that one's actually pretty intriguing to listen to. I'm not single anymore, but for the single men out there, they need to listen to that one.
Yeah, well, and you do see that. Like, I mean, I've been, funny enough, we're watching a lot of they're like the YouTube channels that take the stories from Reddit and narrate them and whatnot. And so I've been watching a lot of like these like Craigslist scam videos, and especially in like the early days of Craigslist, there are a lot of people using that and using like the Lonely's ads, not necessarily women as well, but posing as women to lure single men out to the middle of nowhere, and then they'd get jumped by 3 guys with guns or whatever. And it's definitely eye-opening stuff. I think today people are a little bit more aware of that kind of like internet safety and making sure you always meet up in a public place and all of this stuff. But definitely eye-opening to see some of the things that happen out there.
All right, it's funny you mentioned Craigslist because I would be covering Philip Markoff, who was known as the Craigslist killer.
Yeah.
Somebody you definitely wouldn't expect to be doing that. I mean, he's high prestige and college engaged.
Yeah.
So yeah, back in the days of Craigslist, it was really hairy.
Yeah, for sure. And so in terms of podcasting, what is it about podcasting that attracts you to doing it?
So I did do YouTube for about 14 years on a channel called Cena's Corner. I was a rock band reviewer. Have you ever heard the game Rock Band?
Yeah.
I did that. I'm a professional musician, so I got into that. After that fizzled out, I was kind of looking for something else to do, something to just make my voice be heard. And then my daughter pops up and goes, "Let's do a podcast." We both like true crime, and then that began that.
Yeah.
And so after we did that, David Crown's about 4 years old. I'm like, what else can I do in the podcast world that would bring people together and maybe give them something that they want to listen to as well? And I can speak my mind on some things. That's the cool thing about podcasting is it's your show. You can don't have to sugarcoat anything.
Yeah.
And so True Crime and Authors was born for that reason. I said, there's a lot of single cases I want to do that not necessarily she doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's put these out in the world and have people consume them. So it's just about having that platform that at any time that something important came up, I have that, I can push it out into the world. And there will be different segments of True Crime and Authors that will start appearing other than just those two, just a True Crime and Author segment as we go forward, because I think there's so many things in the world that we need to discuss.
Yeah, cool. And you mentioned being a musician. So what instruments do you play?
I am a drummer now for about 45 years.
Wow.
So yeah.
Awesome. And what genre of music or just anything?
I've played them all. I think my favorite is probably fusion, jazz, and pop.
Yeah.
But I've played every genre. I've been in a couple of bands in my life. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So, and we kind of touched upon this briefly, but you came across me through Genius Books, and I wondered what you can tell us about kind of how you came to be working with Genius Books and what that's been like so far.
So I think back in, I want to say August, I hadn't even dropped an episode yet. The podcast, True Crime and Authors, is coming out to September 5th. And I had posted on my Bookstagram that I was going to be interviewing LaDonna Humphrey, who has written a book called The Girl I Never Knew Who Killed Melissa Wett. And she just released Strangled, second part to that. And all of a sudden I get this direct message from Genius Books that pretty much said, "Hey, I hear you interviewing LaDonna Humphrey. We have all these authors." So then my relationship with Stephen and Leah was born. So long before they even heard my voice or heard an episode, they blasted all of you guys who are authors and said, "Hey, there's great new shows coming up." And I got flooded.
Yeah.
Which was good because I was expecting to have to really work really hard to fill my show. My show, season 1, should end around June. Yeah. And overnight, I had enough authors to carry me through March.
Nice.
So working with them has been great. Communication with them has been great. They've given me anything and everything that I've needed and made me available to great people like yourself. So I have nothing bad to say about Genius Books at all.
Awesome. Well, it's funny, and that's something I can relate to. And we kind of were talking about this before we started the interview. That, like, so with me, because I try and it's a local show, so I try and interview people in the local area where I can. But there's only so many people involved, like in the local art scene, that I can cover. And also I want to get a wide range. I don't want to just do only musicians or whatever it is. So sometimes I'm really struggling to get guests. And then recently I put a call out and I'm suddenly booked up until about February or something like that. And it's so useful to me to have that little bit of a breather, because that gives me time to then find new people and, as you say, to then go out and do some of that research. It just takes a lot of that pressure off. So it's kind of a useful thing for you there to have.
It certainly is. Sometimes it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
But no, I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the relationship. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Cool. And in terms of like the episodes that you put out, I guess on both shows really, maybe more for the one you do with your daughter, but what research do you do ahead of each episode?
So those cases are a little bit more intriguing because it's 2 of us on there. We switch who's leading. So one week it's me, the other week is Geneva. We both do our own individual research. Now this becomes very interesting because sometimes I may find something that she doesn't know, or she may find something that I don't know. You can hear this is very evident if you listen to the episode about Trayvon Martin, because I had found tidbits about the gun that George Zimmerman used and what he did with it, and she had no clue.
Yeah.
So each of those episodes, we researched about a week and a half before we produced them. When we did the BTK killer, that actually was a couple of months because his daughter, Carrie Rawson, had released a book, and we wanted to read her book first before we did that.
Yeah.
So depending on the case, it could be anywhere from 1 week to a couple of months before you've actually heard it that we researched.
Yeah, and I guess as well, again, like depending upon the case, because if you do somebody, super famous, like I don't know, if you did Ted Bundy, for example, there's going to be so much information out there that it's going to take you a few months to go through it all. Whereas with other cases, if they're like breaking cases or they're not particularly well publicized, there might only be a few different, resources that you can tap into there.
Right, and that's the beauty of True A Day with Crime, is because it's more of a conversational podcast, so it's not a real deep dive. So we do the research up into, we give you the whole case and then we discuss it. But like you said, we've had huge cases before. The staircase was requested of us to do that, but they wanted every episode broke down. I think that was like 18 episodes long. So there are some cases that you will see a two-parter, or there's some cases we say, hey, there's much more information. Here's all the links. We'll be here 4 years to do this.
Yeah,
Ted Bundy is such a case.
Yeah. Where you could have an episode for every victim or something like that. Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing with Jeffrey Dahmer at this point, right? You easily could have an episode per victim, which is about 17 of those just alone. So.
Yeah. Cool. And just to end on, really, so what have you got coming up next, and where can people follow you to find out more, and where can they find each of your podcasts?
All right, so coming up next on True Crime and Authors is definitely we're going to be doing the West Memphis 3. I did that case with my daughter about a year or so ago, but I'm just going to bring that one over. I was going to reshoot it, but sometimes, as we were discussing off air, you can't capture what you've done the first time again. So that one will be coming up, releasing actually every Tuesday. So the following Tuesday, that will be coming out. Day with Crime, we don't know what's coming up next. It's been on hiatus. My daughter had taken a new job. We're just about to bring that back. So hopefully really soon. You can actually, one link will get you every information for all of them. It's in the link tree. So it's a link tree at David McClam. Also, truecrimeandauthors.com is my web address, and truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com is also my email if you guys want to write out to me.
Big thank you to David McClam for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Winter Hill by Frank Birtwistle.
back so we're not stuck in the middle. You try to stand, stumble and fall, bridges divide between us. Now we both understand the call, we're all just stuck in the middle. I felt so obsolete, you so indiscreet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Downtrodden and beat, you always on your feet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Knocked down outside and in distress, you're not what I am used to. You came from all, I came from there. Somehow we meet in the middle. I felt so obsolete, you so indiscreet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street. Downtrodden and beat, you always on your feet. We will never meet, two sides of the same street.
That was Same Street by Altered Mindset, and before that we had Winter Hill by Frank Birtwistle. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Sunshine Superman, the best of Donovan. The odd thing about Donovan is how he went from being so well known in the 60s to being almost totally forgotten in the 70s. Songs that were as popular as the Beatles and the Stones, songs that were everywhere, were suddenly nowhere to be found. I remember wondering if I'd imagined the guy singing about electrical bananas, or chanting nonsense like Goo Goo Barabachuckle. I think the radio stations may have continued to play his first hit, a solo acoustic song called Catch the Wind, the song that labelled him the new Dylan. And it is very Dylan, even has a harmonica. He followed this with another excellent self-penned song, Colours. After that it all becomes very mid-60s. Session musicians seem to be having a party, bringing to life a whole bunch of simple but quite catchy ideas, making chants and poems into anthems for flower children. The harmonic simplicity of songs like First There Is a Mountain made them popular for jam bands to jam to. Season of the Witch actually sounds like Jefferson Airplane. Hurdy-Gurdy Man has an Eastern drone feel, as does Sunshine Superman. And Jennifer Juniper has a whole section in French that I had totally forgotten about. He was friends with the Beatles and they took him with them when they met the Maharishi. He was a household name, and he probably would have continued to be a household name if that name was Mellow Yellow. Sunshine Superman, the best of Donovan.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you for David McClam for coming on the show. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeating on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also contact me here at the studio by dropping me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So as always, thanks a lot for listening, a lot for listening. I will catch you next week. In the meantime, this is Grace Note with their cover of Depeche Mode's Just Can't Get Enough. I'll catch you later.
When I'm with you, baby, I go out. my head. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. All the things you do to me and everything you said. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. We slip and slide as we fall in love, and I just can't seem to get enough of. We walk together, we're walking down the street. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. Every time I think of you, I know we have to meet. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. It's getting harder, it's a burning love, and I just can't seem to get enough of. I just can't get enough. 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 And when it rains, you're shining down on me. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. Just like a rainbow, you know you set me free. I just can't get enough. I just can't get enough. You're like an angel and you give me your love, but I just can't seem to get enough of. Oh, I just can't get enough. 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 You're like an angel and you give me your love, but I just can't seem to get enough.